Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he carried the heavy bucket of kitchen scraps toward the pig pen. The sun was setting behind the rolling hills of New Haven Colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had been another long day on his small farm, but Jake didn't mind the hard work. He had come to this frontier world 3 years ago looking for a fresh start, and farming had given him exactly that. The pigs squealed with excitement as they heard his footsteps approaching. Benny, his favorite spotted pig, pressed his snout through the fence rails and snorted a greeting. Jake chuckled and scratched behind the pig's ears before lifting the bucket to pour the scraps into their feeding trough. That's when he heard it. A deep whooshing sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, but much louder. Jake looked up just in time to see a massive shadow pass overhead. His heart jumped as something enormous landed in the middle of his pig pen with a heavy thud that shook the ground beneath his feet. The creature was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Even in the colonial briefings about local wildlife, it stood 20 feet long from nose to tail, with powerful legs that ended in claws the size of dinner plates. Dark purple scales covered its body, shifting to midnight blue along its back and wings. The creature's head was elegant yet fearsome, with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to glow in the fading daylight. A dragon. Jake had heard rumors about them from other colonists, but seeing one up close was completely different. The creature was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Most people would have dropped everything and run screaming for help. Jake simply stood there, still holding his bucket of pig scraps, and stared. The dragon's massive head turned toward him, and those amber eyes fixed on his face. Jake felt his heart pounding, but something told him not to move. The creature didn't seem aggressive. Instead, it looked almost nervous, like it was trying to decide whether to stay or fly away. The dragon's gaze shifted from Jake to the bucket in his hands. Then it did something that made Jake question whether he was dreaming. The creature sniffed the air delicately, and its eyes focused on the scraps with unmistakable hunger. "You smell something good?" Jake asked, surprising himself with how calm his voice sounded. The dragon's head snapped back to look at him, eyes wide with what might have been shock. It tilted its massive head to one side, studying Jake like he was some strange puzzle. Then the dragon spoke. "I smell cooked pig meat," it said in a voice that was clearly female, with a slight accent that Jake couldn't place. "Do you have leftovers? I do not wish to hunt your livestock." Jake blinked twice, convinced he was hallucinating. Dragons could talk, and this one was asking politely for food instead of just taking it. He looked at the creature's massive claws, each one capable of tearing through steel, then at his small collection of pigs. She could have taken any of them without breaking a sweat, but instead she was asking for scraps. "Yeah," Jake said slowly, still not quite believing this was happening. "I've got some leftover pork roast from yesterday. Was going to give it to the pigs anyway." The dragon's expression seemed to brighten, though it was hard to tell with such an alien face. "You would share with me?" "Sure, why not?" Jake set down the bucket and headed toward his farmhouse. "Give me a minute." As he walked away, Jake couldn't help but wonder if he was making a huge mistake. Colonial regulations were very clear about contact with unknown alien species. He was supposed to report any encounters immediately and avoid interaction until trained xenologists could assess the situation. But something about the dragon's polite request and obvious hunger made him want to help. Jake's farmhouse was small but comfortable, with a kitchen that smelled like the pork roast he had cooked the night before. He opened his refrigerator and pulled out the leftover meat, along with some vegetables he had roasted alongside it. The portion was bigger than he remembered, enough to feed several people. He hoped it would be enough for a hungry dragon. When he returned to the pig pen, the dragon was sitting patiently where he had left her. She had folded her wings neatly against her back and was watching his pigs with curious eyes. Benny and the others had retreated to the far side of their pen, but didn't seem terrified, just cautious. Jake set the plate of food on the ground between himself and the dragon, then stepped back to give her space. The dragon approached the food carefully, as if she didn't want to seem too eager. She examined the pork roast for a moment, then used one massive claw to tear off a piece. To Jake's surprise, she ate delicately, taking small bites and chewing thoughtfully. "This is very good," the dragon said between bites. "You cook well for a human." "Thanks," Jake replied, still amazed that he was having a conversation with a dragon. "I'm Jake, by the way. Jake Morrison." The dragon paused in her eating and looked up at him. "I am called Vera. It is nice to meet you, Jake Morrison." They stood in comfortable silence while Vera finished the food. She cleaned the plate completely, not wasting a single scrap. When she was done, she looked up at Jake with what he was beginning to recognize as gratitude. "Thank you for this kindness," Vera said formally. "I will remember it, and I will repay it somehow." "Don't worry about it," Jake said with a shrug. "Everyone gets hungry sometimes." Vera studied his face for a long moment as if trying to understand something puzzling. "Most humans fear my kind. They shoot at us with their weapons when we come near their settlements." Jake considered this. "Well, you asked politely instead of just taking what you wanted. That counts for something in my book." Something that might have been a smile crossed Vera's dragon features. She spread her massive wings, and Jake stepped back as she prepared to take off. The wind from her wings stirred up dust and scattered leaves across the farmyard. "I may return tomorrow," Vera said as she lifted into the air, "if you do not mind." "I'll try to have leftovers," Jake called up to her. Vera's rumbling laugh echoed across the farm as she disappeared into the darkening sky, leaving Jake alone with his pigs and the strange certainty that his quiet life as a frontier farmer had just become much more interesting. As he finally poured the kitchen scraps into the pig trough, Jake wondered what he had gotten himself into. But as Benny snorted happily and began eating his dinner, Jake decided he didn't really care. For the first time since arriving on this frontier world, he felt like he might have made a real friend. Even if that friend happened to be a 20-foot dragon with claws that could slice through steel, tomorrow would certainly be interesting. The next evening, Jake found himself looking up at the sky more often than usual as he went about his farm chores. He wasn't sure if Vera would actually return, but he had saved some leftover chicken from his lunch just in case. When the familiar whooshing sound filled the air just after sunset, he couldn't help but smile. Vera landed more gently this time, settling down outside the pig pen instead of inside it. The pigs barely looked up from their evening meal, already getting used to their unusual visitor. Jake walked over with a plate of chicken and some roasted potatoes, setting it down in the same spot as the night before. "You came back," Jake said, sitting down on an old wooden crate he had brought outside for the occasion. "I said I would," Vera replied, beginning to eat with the same careful manners as before. "You seem surprised," Jake shrugged. "Most folks around here don't keep their promises unless there's something in it for them." Vera paused in her eating to look at him. "What is in it for you? Feeding me, I mean." It was a good question, and Jake had to think about it for a moment. "Honestly, I get lonely out here sometimes. My neighbors are all at least 5 miles away, and they're not exactly the chatty type. Having someone to talk to is nice, even if that someone happens to be a dragon." "You are not afraid of me," Vera observed. It wasn't quite a question. "Should I be?" Jake asked back. Vera considered this while she ate another piece of chicken. "I could kill you easily. My claws, my teeth, my fire breath, any of these could end your life in seconds. But you won't," Jake said with confidence he didn't entirely feel. "No, I will not. But how do you know this?" Jake leaned back against the fence post. "Because if you wanted to hurt me, you wouldn't be sitting here eating my leftovers and having a conversation. You'd have just done it already." Vera made a sound that might have been approval. "You think clearly for a human. Most of your kind see only the danger in mine." As the days passed, their evening meetings became a routine. Vera would arrive just after sunset and Jake would have food waiting for her. Sometimes it was leftover meat from his own meals, sometimes vegetables from his garden, and once even a failed attempt at making bread that had turned out too hard for human teeth, but seemed perfect for a dragon. During these visits, they talked about many things. Vera told Jake about her life before meeting him. She was what her people called a rogue, a dragon who had chosen to leave her clan's traditional territory to live alone. It was unusual but not forbidden among dragonkind. "Why did you leave?" Jake asked one evening as Vera carefully ate some leftover beef stew. "My clan lives in the deep mountains far from human settlements," Vera explained. "They follow the old ways, hunting the great beasts that roam the high peaks. But those beasts are becoming scarce. Your people's expansion has changed their migration patterns." Jake felt a stab of guilt. "I'm sorry. We didn't know we were causing problems for your food supply." "It is not your fault personally," Vera said kindly. "Change happens. Those who adapt survive. Those who do not, do not. I chose to adapt by coming to these lower lands to find new sources of food." "Is that why you're alone? Because you adapted and they didn't want to?" Vera's amber eyes grew distant. Not exactly. My clan believes that asking humans for help shows weakness. They would rather go hungry than appear to beg from what they consider a lesser species. But you don't think we're lesser, Jake said. How could I? You share your food with a stranger who could easily be your enemy. You ask questions to understand rather than assuming you already know the answers. These are not the actions of a lesser being. Jake began to look forward to their conversations as much as Vera seemed to. She was incredibly intelligent, with a perspective on the world that was completely different from his own. She told him about dragon culture, their complex social structures, and their long history on this world that stretched back thousands of years before humans arrived. In return, Jake shared stories about Earth, about why humans had left their home planet to spread across the galaxy, and about the hopes and dreams that had brought him to this frontier world. Vera listened to everything with fascination, asking thoughtful questions that often made Jake think about things in new ways. Your species travels between stars, Vera said one evening. Yet you choose to grow food in dirt and care for simple animals. Why? Jake scratched Benny behind the ears as the pig snuffled around his feet looking for dropped treats. I guess because it feels real. Back on Earth, everything was processed, automated, artificial. Here, when I plant seeds and they grow into food, when I take care of animals and they trust me, it feels like I'm actually doing something meaningful. You find meaning in small things, Vera observed, don't you? Vera was quiet for a long moment. Dragons are taught to find meaning in great deeds, in conquest and territory and displays of power. But sitting here talking with you while eating food you prepared with your own hands, I think perhaps we have been looking in the wrong places. As their friendship grew, Vera began to help Jake with small tasks around the farm. Her keen eyesight could spot problems with crops or animals that Jake might miss. She could see predators approaching from miles away and warn him before they became a threat. Her mere presence seemed to keep the local wildlife from bothering his livestock. One evening, Jake noticed that Vera seemed restless, shifting her weight from foot to foot and glancing toward the mountains more often than usual. Something wrong? He asked. Vera hesitated before answering. I have a clutch sister named Luna. We hatched from eggs in the same nest, though we are not related by blood. She chose to stay with our clan when I left. You miss her, Jake said, understanding immediately. Yes, and I worry about her. The last message I received through the wind singers said that she was becoming thin, that the hunting grows poor in the high mountains. My clan's pride will not let them seek help from humans, but Luna is young and not as strong as the older dragons. Jake could hear the worry in Vera's voice. Is there anything you can do to help her? I have been taking food back to the mountains when I can, but it is not enough, and I cannot hunt the large prey alone that would truly feed her well. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if we figured out a way to help that didn't hurt your clan's pride? Vera looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. You would help my clutch sister, a dragon you have never met? Luna's family to you and you're my friend, Jake said simply. That makes it simple math in my book. For the first time since he had known her, Jake saw tears gather in Vera's amber eyes. In that moment, he realized that their friendship had become something much deeper than he had expected. They weren't just a human and a dragon sharing meals anymore. They were two souls who had found understanding and trust across the vast differences between their species. Thank you, Jake Morrison, Vera said softly. I begin to understand why my people should not be so quick to judge yours. 3 weeks had passed since Jake first met Vera, and their evening routine had become the highlight of his day. He always made sure to cook a little extra food so he would have leftovers to share. But when Vera arrived on this particular evening, Jake immediately knew something was wrong. The Dragoness landed heavily, her usual graceful movement replaced by something that looked painful. Her beautiful purple and blue scales seemed dull, lacking their normal shimmer in the evening light. She moved slowly, carefully, as if every step caused her discomfort. Vera? Jake called out, setting down the plate of leftover ham he had prepared. Are you hurt? Vera approached the food but didn't immediately begin eating as she usually did. Instead, she settled down with obvious relief, as if standing had been difficult. Her amber eyes, normally bright and alert, seemed clouded with worry and exhaustion. I am not injured, Vera said, but her voice sounded strained. But I bring troubling news. My clutch sister Luna is very ill. Jake felt his stomach drop. Over the past weeks, Vera had told him many stories about Luna. Despite being from the same nest, the two dragons were very different. Where Vera was curious and willing to try new things, Luna was traditional and followed the old dragon ways. But they loved each other deeply, and Jake could see how much Luna meant to Vera. "What kind of illness?" Jake asked, moving closer to examine Vera more carefully. Now that he looked, he could see she was breathing harder than normal and there was a slight tremor in her voice. "She has trouble breathing," Vera explained. "Her chest makes terrible sounds when she tries to fly. She coughs constantly and cannot keep food down. The clan elders say it is a sickness of the lungs that sometimes strikes young dragons during the cold season." Jake's mind immediately went to respiratory infections, something he had dealt with in his livestock before. "How long has she been sick?" 2 weeks now, and she grows worse each day. Yesterday she could not even leave her cave. The wind singers brought me word that she may not survive another week without help." "What kind of help?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Vera looked at him with desperate eyes. "There is a medicine that humans use for such sickness. I have heard other dragons speak of it when they tell stories of contact with your people. They call it antibiotics. It can cure the lung sickness that would otherwise kill us." Jake nodded grimly. He had antibiotics in his emergency medical kit, but they were restricted supplies. Colonial regulations required detailed paperwork and approval from the medical department before they could be distributed. The process could take weeks, and from the sound of things, Luna didn't have weeks. "Antibiotics are controlled by the colony government," Jake explained carefully. "I would need to file official requests, get medical approval, prove that the medicine is for human use." He watched Vera's expression fall as he spoke. Her head drooped until her chin nearly touched the ground, and her wings folded tightly against her body, in what Jake was learning to recognize as a sign of deep sadness. "I understand," Vera said quietly. "I should not have asked. Your laws are made for humans, not for dragons. It was foolish of me to hope." Jake felt his heart breaking as he watched his friend's despair. Vera had never asked him for anything except leftover food. She had shared her stories, her friendship, and her help around the farm freely. Now, when she desperately needed his help in return, bureaucratic rules stood in the way. "Hey," Jake said firmly, "I didn't say I wouldn't help. I just said it would be complicated." Vera lifted her head to look at him, hope flickering in her amber eyes. "What do you mean?" Jake was already walking toward his farmhouse, his mind racing. "Give me 10 minutes to pack some supplies. If Luna needs antibiotics, then that's what she's going to get." "Pack supplies?" Vera's voice rose with confusion and something that might have been panic. "Jake, what are you planning?" Jake emerged from his house carrying his emergency medical kit, a backpack stuffed with food and water, and a heavy jacket. "Well, you said Luna lives 2 days' flight from here, right? I'm assuming you can carry me without too much trouble. We should be able to get there and back before anyone notices I'm gone." Vera stared at him as if he had suddenly grown wings himself. "You want to travel to the Dragon Mountains? To the clan territories where no human has ever been welcome? Luna's your family," Jake said simply, checking the contents of his medical kit to make sure he had enough antibiotics and other supplies. "You're my friend. That makes this simple math. But the danger," Vera protested. "My clan does not trust humans. They may see you as a threat, and the journey itself is perilous. The mountain winds are treacherous, and there are creatures that hunt in the high peaks that even dragons avoid." Jake shouldered his backpack and looked up at Vera with determination. "Are you saying you can't protect me?" "No, I can protect you," Vera said quickly. "But why would you risk so much for a dragon you have never met? Your people and mine are not allies. There is no treaty, no agreement that binds you to help us." Jake walked over to Vera and placed his hand gently on her massive snout. Her scales were warm under his palm, and he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her body from worry and exhaustion. "Vera, 3 weeks ago, you could have taken anything you wanted from my farm. My pigs, my food, my life, if you had chosen to. Instead, you asked politely for leftovers. You showed me respect and kindness when you had no reason to. You've become my friend, and friends help each other." Tears gathered in Vera's amber eyes again, just as they had when Jake had first offered to help with Luna. "Your species continues to surprise me," she said softly. "My clan believes humans are selfish and cruel, interested only in taking what they want from others." "Some humans are like that," Jake admitted. "But some dragons probably are too. We can't judge entire species by their worst members." Vera was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Then she lowered herself closer to the ground, extending one wing. Climb onto my back just behind my shoulders. Hold tightly to the ridge spines there, but do not pull on them. And Jake? Yeah? Thank you. What you are doing. It means more than you can know. Jake climbed carefully onto Vera's back, settling himself between two of the large spines that ran along her neck and shoulders. The scales were smooth but provided good grip, and he found a comfortable position quickly. You sure you can carry me this far? Jake asked, suddenly aware of how much he might weigh to a dragon, even one as large as Vera. You are lighter than a young deer, Vera replied, flexing her wings experimentally. The greater challenge will be the distance and the mountain weather. Are you certain you want to do this? Jake looked up at the darkening sky, then down at his peaceful farm below. In a few hours he would be in dragon territory, farther from human civilization than any colonist had ever traveled. The smart thing would be to stay home, follow proper procedures, and let bureaucracy take its course. Let's go save your sister, Jake said firmly. Vera's rumbling laugh mixed with what might have been a sob of relief. Hold on tightly, my brave friend. We have a long journey ahead of us. With a powerful leap, Vera launched herself into the evening sky, carrying Jake toward the distant mountains and an adventure that would change both their lives forever. Flying on Dragonback was nothing like Jake had imagined. He had expected it to be terrifying, and in some ways it was. The ground fell away beneath them until his farm looked like a toy model, and the wind whipped through his hair with enough force to make his eyes water. But there was also something magical about it that took his breath away. Vera flew with smooth, powerful wing beats that carried them high above the rolling farmland of the colony. Jake could see the lights of New Haven settlement twinkling in the distance, and beyond that, the vast wilderness that still covered most of this frontier world. The view was incredible, showing him his adopted home from a perspective no human had ever seen before. Are you comfortable? Vera called back to him, her voice carrying easily despite the wind. Yeah, Jake shouted back, tightening his grip on the ridge spines along her neck. This is amazing. I never realized how big this world really is. As they flew further from the colony, the landscape below began to change. The neat fields and fenced pastures gave way to dense forests of tall trees, with silver bark that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Rivers wound through the wilderness like dark ribbons, and Jake could occasionally see the glowing eyes of nocturnal creatures looking up at them from the forest canopy. Those are night hunters, Vera explained when Jake pointed them out. They hunt in packs and are very dangerous on the ground. But they cannot fly, so we are safe up here. The first few hours of the journey passed peacefully. Vera maintained a steady pace, and Jake found himself getting used to the rhythm of her flight. The dragon's body generated a surprising amount of warmth, keeping him comfortable despite the cool night air rushing past them. But as they approached the foothills of the mountain range, the weather began to change. Clouds gathered around the peaks ahead, and the wind became gusty and unpredictable. Vera had to work harder to maintain their course, her wing beats becoming more frequent and forceful. Mountain weather, Vera called back to Jake. It changes quickly here. Hold on tighter. The next hour was much more challenging. Wind gusts buffeted them from different directions, and rain began to fall in heavy drops that stung Jake's face. Vera struggled against the turbulent air, her flight becoming less smooth as she fought to keep them on course toward the dragon caves. Lightning flashed in the clouds around them, and thunder rolled across the mountain peaks with deafening force. Jake pressed himself closer to Vera's back, grateful for her warmth and strength as she battled through the storm. He couldn't see how she was navigating in such conditions, but she seemed to know exactly where she was going. Almost there, Vera shouted over the wind. The caves are just ahead. Through the rain and darkness, Jake began to make out the shape of a massive cliff face rising out of the mountainside. As they drew closer, he could see that it wasn't just a natural rock formation. The cliff was covered with carefully carved openings, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to follow some kind of architectural plan. Those are dragon caves? Jake asked in amazement. My clan has lived here for over 1,000 years, Vera replied with obvious pride. Each generation adds new chambers and improves the design. It is not the primitive dwelling your people might expect. Vera landed on a wide ledge in front of one of the larger cave openings. Jake slid down from her back on shaky legs, his muscles stiff from the long flight and his clothes soaked from the rain. But before he could fully appreciate their arrival, he became aware that they were not alone. Dragons emerged from the caves around them. At first, Jake saw only glowing eyes in the darkness, but as his vision adjusted, he could make out massive shapes moving on the ledges above and below them. There were at least a dozen dragons of various sizes, all watching the unexpected arrival of a human in their territory. The silence was broken by a deep, rumbling voice that seemed to come from the largest cave opening. "Fear, a rogue daughter, you return to us, and you bring a human into our sacred spaces." An enormous dragon emerged from the shadows. This one was even larger than Vera, with scales that had turned silver with age and scars that spoke of countless battles. His amber eyes, so similar to Vera's but much colder, fixed on Jake with obvious suspicion. "Elder Magnus," Vera said respectfully, lowering her head, "I have brought help for Luna. This human has medicine that can save her life." "A human," Magnus repeated, his voice filled with distaste. "You ask us to trust one of the creatures that drove our prey from these mountains, that builds their settlements on our hunting grounds?" Jake felt the weight of many dragon eyes upon him. Some seemed merely curious, but others held clear hostility. He realized that one wrong word or movement could turn this encounter deadly very quickly. "I don't ask for trust," Jake said, stepping forward despite his fear. "I ask for the chance to help Luna. Vera is my friend and Luna is her family. That's all that matters to me." Magnus studied Jake for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look right through him. "You speak boldly for such a small creature. Do you understand that you are the first human ever to enter our domain? That your presence here violates treaties older than your colony? I understand that Luna is dying and I have medicine that might save her," Jake replied firmly. "Everything else can be sorted out later." A murmur ran through the gathered dragons. Some seemed impressed by Jake's boldness, while others hissed their disapproval. Magnus raised one massive claw and the sounds immediately stopped. "Show me this medicine," Magnus commanded. Jake opened his medical kit and pulled out the bottles of antibiotics, along with syringes and other supplies. "These are antibiotics. They fight infections in the lungs and other parts of the body. I've used them to save sick animals on my farm. You would treat my granddaughter like a farm animal?" Another dragon growled from the shadows. "I would treat her like a patient who needs help," Jake shot back. "Medicine is medicine. Disease doesn't care if you're human, dragon, or anything else." Vera stepped closer to Jake, offering her silent support. "Elder Magnus, Luna grows weaker every hour. Please let Jake try to help her." Magnus was quiet for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he stepped aside and gestured toward the cave behind him. "Very well. But know this, human. If you harm Luna, accidentally or otherwise, you will not leave these mountains alive." Jake nodded, understanding the threat was not empty. "I'll do my best to help her." As they entered the cave system, Jake was amazed by what he saw. The caves were not primitive dwellings, but sophisticated living spaces carved from the mountain rock. The walls were smooth and decorated with intricate patterns, and the passages were lit by some kind of luminescent stones that gave off a warm, steady glow. They followed a winding tunnel deeper into the mountain until they reached a large chamber. In the center, on a bed of soft materials that might have been dried grasses and moss, lay a dragon that was clearly very ill. Luna was smaller than Vera, with scales that should have been a bright green but had faded to a sickly yellow-brown. Her breathing was labored and made terrible rattling sounds with each breath. Her eyes were closed and she barely seemed aware of their presence. "She is much worse than when I left," Vera whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jake knelt beside Luna and opened his medical kit. "Let me examine her first. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before I give her any medicine." As Jake began his examination, using the veterinary skills he had learned from years of caring for farm animals, he became aware of many dragon eyes watching his every move. The fate of more than just Luna seemed to hang in the balance of what happened in this cave. Jake worked carefully as he examined Luna, aware that every dragon in the cave was watching his movements. The young Dragoness was in worse condition than he had expected. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when he listened to her chest, he could hear the unmistakable sounds of fluid in her lungs. It was definitely a severe respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. "She needs antibiotics immediately," Jake told Vera and the gathered dragons, "but I also need to drain some of the fluid from her lungs so she can breathe better." Elder Magnus stepped closer, his massive form casting a shadow over Jake. "What does this draining involve?" Jake explained the procedure as simply as he could, showing them the medical equipment he would use. Several dragons hissed their disapproval when they saw the needles and tubes, but Magnus silenced them with a look. "Do what you must," the elder dragon said grimly. "But be warned, human. If Luna dies during your treatment, you will join her." Jake nodded and began to work. He had performed similar procedures on sick cattle and horses, but never on a dragon. Fortunately, Luna's anatomy seemed similar enough to other large mammals that his knowledge applied. He carefully inserted a drainage tube between her ribs, and immediately thick infected fluid began to flow out. Luna's breathing eased almost immediately as the pressure was relieved from her lungs. For the first time since they had arrived, her eyes opened and she looked around the cave with confusion. "Vera," Luna's voice was weak but clear. "You came back." "I brought help," Vera said, moving closer to nuzzle her clutch sister gently. "This is Jake. He is a human, but he is also my friend. He came all this way to help you get better." Luna's gaze shifted to Jake, and he saw the same intelligence in her green eyes that he had come to know in Vera's amber ones. But where Vera was curious and open, Luna seemed cautious and uncertain. "A human," Luna whispered. "In our caves. A human who is trying to save your life," Jake said gently as he prepared the antibiotic injection. "This is going to sting a little, but it should help you feel much better." Luna held still as Jake administered the medicine, though her eyes never left his face. When he was finished, she spoke again, her voice slightly stronger. "Why do you help me? We are not of the same species." "Because Vera asked me to," Jake replied simply, "and because everyone deserves help when they're sick." Over the next 2 days, Jake stayed in the dragon caves to monitor Luna's recovery. The antibiotics worked quickly, and the drainage procedure had given her immediate relief. By the second day, she was sitting up and eating small amounts of food. By the third day, she was able to walk around the cave under her own power. But during his time in the caves, Jake made a disturbing discovery that went far beyond Luna's illness. The dragons weren't just dealing with one sick clan member. They were facing a much larger crisis that threatened their entire way of life. As he walked through the cave system, Jake noticed that many of the dragons looked thin and weak. The younger ones especially seemed undernourished, and several of the adults showed signs of stress and poor health. When he mentioned this to Vera, she reluctantly confirmed his suspicions. "The great herds that our people have hunted for generations no longer come through these mountains," Vera explained as they sat outside Luna's cave. "Your colony's expansion has changed their migration routes. The animals now travel through valleys that are too close to human settlements for us to hunt safely. So your whole clan is slowly starving," Jake said, understanding the full scope of the problem. "We are proud people," Elder Magnus said, appearing beside them with surprising quiet for such a large creature. "We do not beg for help, especially from those who caused our troubles in the first place." Jake looked around at the other dragons he could see. Many were resting more than seemed natural, conserving energy because they didn't have enough food. Young dragons stayed close to their parents instead of playing and exploring as healthy youngsters should. "Pride doesn't fill empty stomachs," Jake said bluntly, "and it won't save your people if you all starve to death." Magnus's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare lecture us on survival, human? We have lived on this world for thousands of years before your kind arrived. And you can live here for thousands more," Jake replied calmly. "But only if we figure out a way to work together instead of pretending the other doesn't exist." Jake spent the rest of that day thinking about the problem. By evening, he had the beginnings of an idea. It was crazy and would probably get him in trouble with the colonial authorities, but it might just work. What if we made a deal? Jake proposed to Magnus and the other dragon elders who had gathered to hear him. The colony has problems that dragons could help with, and dragons need food sources that the colony could provide. What kind of deal? Magnus asked suspiciously. Jake outlined his idea. Dragons could provide aerial surveillance for the colony, spotting threats from the air that ground-based sensors might miss. They could help with weather monitoring, search and rescue operations, and protection from the dangerous predators that sometimes threatened the outlying farms. In exchange, the colony could establish managed hunting areas where dragons could take livestock specifically raised for that purpose, and provide medical care when dragons needed it. "You suggest we become servants to humans?" one of the other elders said with disgust. "I suggest you become partners," Jake corrected. "Equal partners working together for mutual benefit." The dragons discussed the idea among themselves for hours, their deep voices echoing through the caves in their own language. Finally, Magnus turned back to Jake. Even if we agreed to such an arrangement, your people would never accept it. They fear us too much. Some of them would, Jake admitted. But some would be willing to try, especially if they could see the benefits. And once a few people saw that it worked, others would follow. When it came time for Jake and Vera to return to the colony, Luna was strong enough to walk to the cave entrance to see them off. She approached Jake shyly and bowed her head in the formal dragon gesture of respect. "Thank you for saving my life," she said. "I misjudged your species. Perhaps there is hope for understanding between our kinds after all." The flight back to Jake's farm was much easier than the journey to the mountains. The weather was clear, and Vera was in much better spirits knowing that Luna was recovering. But as they approached the familiar landscape of the colony, both of them knew that their real challenges were just beginning. "Are you prepared for the trouble this will cause?" Vera asked as they landed in Jake's farmyard. "Your authorities will not be pleased that you left without permission and entered dragon territory." "Probably not," Jake agreed. "But sometimes you have to do what's right instead of what's easy." Over the following days, Jake prepared for the storm he knew was coming. He wrote detailed reports about his journey, Luna's treatment, and his proposed cooperation agreement. He gathered evidence of the mutual benefits such an arrangement could provide. Most importantly, he asked Vera to be ready to speak for her people when the time came. The confrontation with colonial authorities came sooner than expected. Director Helen Brooks arrived at Jake's farm 3 days after his return, accompanied by security officers and looking very unhappy. "Morrison, you've violated so many regulations I don't know where to start," she said angrily. "Unauthorized departure from your designated zone, contact with unregistered alien life forms, distribution of controlled medical supplies." "And I might have solved our dragon problem," Jake interrupted. "Director Brooks, I'd like you to meet Vera. She's the official representative of the Mountain Dragon Clan, and she has a proposal that could benefit everyone." Vera landed gracefully in the farmyard, and Jake watched Director Brooks's expression change from anger to amazement to fear, and back to amazement. It was the first time any colonial official had seen a dragon up close, and the effect was dramatic. "You can talk," Brooks said, staring at Vera in wonder. "Indeed I can," Vera replied with dignity, "and I come with an offer of friendship and cooperation between our peoples, if you are wise enough to accept it." What followed was the most unusual diplomatic meeting in colonial history. Sitting in Jake's farmyard with curious pigs watching from their pen, a human director and a dragon representative worked out the framework for an agreement that would change everything. 6 months later, the Morrison farm had become the unofficial embassy between humans and dragons. Jake's property now included a landing pad for dragon visitors and guest caves carved into the nearby hillside. Vera had become the first official dragon liaison to the colony, and her clan had settled into a beneficial relationship with the human settlers. The cooperation program exceeded everyone's expectations. Dragons provided early warning of severe weather, helped locate lost colonists, and protected outlying farms from predator attacks. In return, the colony established dragon feeding stations with livestock raised specifically for that purpose and provided medical care when needed. Other human colonies heard about the success at New Haven and began reaching out to local dragon populations. What had started as one farmer sharing leftovers with a hungry dragon had grown into a model for peaceful coexistence that spread across the galaxy. On quiet evenings, Jake and Vera still shared meals as they had in the beginning, but now their conversations included plans for